Hi all, welcome dear listeners to this new episode of my podcast, A Digital Tomorrow. Today I'm joined by David Hardoon. David is working as the Chief Data and Artificial Intelligence Officer at the UnionBank of the Philippines and Chief Data Officer at Union Digital. I'm very honored to welcome David today. I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting discussion. We're going to cover artificial intelligence and many more interesting areas. So welcome, David, to my show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
The pleasure is absolutely mine. And I think we should start maybe from the very beginning. I would like to ask you if you could please share with my listeners a bit more about your personal journey. Like, for example, what made you decide to enter the data and artificial intelligence world?
Okay, maybe you can or can't see me, but I'm blushing a bit because it's quite a geeky story. So what I would say started my journey into this world, or foray into this world, was when I was perhaps 15 years old. I was, see, this is the embarrassing part. I was sent to detention in the library. And I don't even remember how it happened. I came about this really old, crumpled book of prologue. Now, as a kid, you don't have much to do. I picked it up, and I don't know what possessed me to just sit down and start reading this book. And as you may be familiar with prologue, for perhaps the listeners who are old enough to be familiar with prologue, it's a logic-based programming language. And one of the focuses that it looks at is expert-based systems. And I was mesmerized. I was mesmerized about the ability to programmatically put down logic to the extent where it could be used from a decisioning process point of view in medicine and so forth. And naturally, it uses data. Now, it may not go to the extent of the world that we're familiar with, or the world that now ultimately I'm in, which is machine learning, artificial intelligence. But this is one element of that branch. So that was the starting point. And my fascination and interest only grew from then onwards.
Well, thank you very much for sharing. It's a very interesting story. So thank you for sharing. And I think it's time now to dig a bit deeper into data science, artificial intelligence. So I wanted to start by asking you, how do you think that data science and artificial intelligence can help drive financial inclusion in the Philippines and beyond?
Yeah, no, this is a very relevant discussion and topic. If you could, maybe let's take a step back first, and to help answer that question of how can AI help financial inclusion. So first and foremost, it's about financial inclusion, or I like to call it financial resilience, or where it's really how do we go about the demographics that have been unable, for a variety of reasons, to tap into the formal financial system, from the reasons of not having a credit history, not having a bank account. The first thing that you get asked of when you want to apply for a loan of, oh, can you provide me your credit slips? So what happens if you don't get a formal pay slip? What happens when it doesn't go to your bank account? You kind of end up in this catch-22. And then why do I use the word resiliency? Because it's also about people who are already in the formal financial system, but how do we go beyond, essentially? How do we basically assure that they have an ability to have growth? So that's on that side. Then AI, if I bring it down to its absolute rudimentary form, it's about patterns. It's about patterns, it's about decision, and to a certain extent, it's about consistency. So how do these two things come together and help us address that challenge of financial inclusion or financial resiliency is, how do we go about addressing 10 million, 20 million, 40 million, 50 million in the case of Philippines, and much greater number at the rest of the world of people who are not in the formal financial system? Well, you can't, despite whatever ambition one may have, build branches in every location, hire armies of agents. No, there needs to be a way of systematically going out and providing a similar level of service. Well, again, that's what I said earlier, patterns, consistency, decisioning. That's one area where AI helps tremendously. How can it provide assurance of a decision-making process effectively? That's number one. Number two is, how do we deal with a situation whereby there is no formal structure of, let's say, credit? Well, it's about finding alternatives. How can I use alternative availability of data means, from grocery shopping, because there's receipts, energy consumption, what you do, anything. Alternative as a means of providing some indication of the potential aspect of risk. Now, the reality of it is that this is already being used, and it's already being demonstrable that it provides a mechanism for financial institutions to make a risk estimation, a decision. And it now suddenly provides for applicants the ability of saying, well, you know something, I don't have these formal items that you're asking, but I have this. So that's how we go about in addressing effectively. It's expanding the offerings and finding the alternative means of providing offerings.
Well, thank you for sharing. It's actually the first time that I touch on financial inclusion from this data science perspective, so I'm sure my listeners will enjoy listening to this. Now I would like to talk as well about fraud. How do you think that artificial intelligence can be used for monitoring transactions and to identify the fraud?
Yeah, this brings me back to, and it just shows you how much of a kid I am, of Sesame Street, where one of the reoccurring songs on Sesame Street is, one of these things is not like the other. When you think about fraud, and again, fraud or financial crimes, if I look at it in its broader family, is a myriad of things that kind of go bump in the night and falls into the category of one of these things is not like the other. I would like to believe that the vast majority of us are law-abiding citizens, not committing frauds or attempting to. So how do we go about in putting in place systems that when you sell your house and hence have a slightly bump in terms of income, it doesn't go like, oh, the person has suddenly received a huge amount of money, he must be committing a crime. It's like, no, I just sold my house. So it's about that. It's about how to start building more sophisticated approaches which go beyond a traditional rule-based approach in terms of identifying anomalies. And more so, and this is a bit of the aspiration of the world of machine learning and data science, or AI, depending how you called it, is just like in marketing, when you have hyper-personalization, how can I offer an offer that's specific to you? How can I equally go and say, you know something, that transaction you just did cannot be you. It is out of the ordinary. And gives me a mechanism going, pause, asking you perhaps, is this really you? And you'd be like, yeah, it's an out of an ordinary transaction, or no, this is not really me. Thank you for protecting me. That's where it kicks in. Just like earlier when we were talking about financial inclusion, it's about finding consistency in patterns, which also can be used in the hyper-personalization of defense in a certain degree. It's also about finding irregularities, and that ultimately, that's where the world of financial crime falls in. It's about the irregularities, the things that are not quite right, amongst other elements. So there is immense usage, both from detection, operational, reducing the number of false positives. None of us like to be in a dinner date and a credit card being declined, but equally, we want to assure that no one takes our hard-earned cash. So that's really where the myriad of methodologies and capabilities of data science fit in this world of fraud.
Mm-hmm. And what about decision-making and business processes? How can data science and artificial intelligence be relevant in those areas?
So I want to start off by what you've just said, decision-making.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why I want to emphasize that point, it may seem a bit obvious, is because a lot of times when people, I'm overgeneralizing when I say a lot of times. There are times when people go into the world and considering AI, say, oh, let's use AI and let's see what it's going to give us. It's like, no. It's a tool, it's a mechanism, it's an enabler. We start with a decision-making process. We start with that end objective. What is it that we're trying to achieve? Are we trying to sell more of a product? Are we trying to create a product? Are we trying to mitigate risk? Are we trying to increase operational efficiency? What's the key? That decision. So it's really, really important to focus on this and then go to that step backwards and saying, okay, what are we using currently, if anything, from a data landscape in support of that decision? Is it a means of using financial inclusion, alternative data that now can provide us a means of indication of risk that will fit into the decision-making? Is it a matter of hyper-personalization? None of us likes getting spammed with ads, but we do like, personalization and specificity. We're like, yes, I do need one of those right now. So that's really the importance. It's flipping it upside down and realizing that it's a tool to provide a means of information to help make a decision, where the decision is ultimately offer, sell, do not sell, risk, mitigate, improve effectively. So I know what I'm saying may sound a bit like, David, you're telling me the sun rises from the east. But that separation and focus is critically important. And perhaps I'll just end with this particular point, which I tell my own teams, is whenever we go down a path of machine learning data, whether it's inclusion, fraud, decision-making, application, product development, we start with the what. What is it that we're trying to address? What is it that we're trying to do? And that will always start from the business narrative. Then it's the why. Why do we want to do it? What is it that we're trying to achieve in that underlying process? Is it really, we're trying to fix an issue? Is that the why? Or we're trying to improve it? The why. Do not underestimate the why. And only then do we get to the how, which is the AI effectively.
Indeed. I think that this issue that you just mentioned now actually applies not just to artificial intelligence, but to many other technologies. For example, when I talk about blockchain as well, I find that certain people, certain organizations, they just want to use that technology for the sake of using it. Like before thinking whether they actually have a use case or not, you need to start by thinking what you want to solve, and then you can apply or not that technology. So when I was listening to you now, it sounded to me like very familiar when it comes to the blockchain world. But I mean, we were talking about artificial intelligence.
The number of times, not to jump in, but I have to say the number of times that I'll be in a meeting and say like, okay, how do we use blockchain for this? Or how do we use AI for this? And you're like, okay. What is it that we're trying to do?
Exactly. No, I mean, I was saying that because I remember one company was mentoring long ago, and they told me like, we want to use blockchain. And I was like, why? And they told me, well, I don't know, because everyone uses blockchain. Yes, I know, but I mean, do you have a use case? Do you know why you want to use that technology? Because if you don't, there is no point in trying to just apply the technology just for the sake of doing that. So yes, I mean, it sounds quite familiar to me.
If I may, because I would half expect some listeners to jump in and say like, no, but there is all those possibilities that can come from blockchain. You're absolutely correct. And this is where it's really important. And I kind of do this artificial separation between what I call operationalization of AI and innovation of AI. And it's exceedingly artificial. But what I mean by these two things is operationalization of AI is you end with the AI, you start with the use case, you start with the problem. And then essentially it's the mean, it's the tool of how do we apply it effectively and make it real. In the AI innovation then it's the case when we could sit down and go, okay, we know that AI, this particular methodology can do this and that. What is the potentialities that could be in this particular area or can we create a completely new process? The critical difference between these two is, as you can tell from the name of operationalization, is on the one, we need to deploy it. We already know what it's going to do. We know the ROI. It is almost a confined, stepwise approach in terms of deployment. The other one is we could come up with a wonderful new idea, but then we realize there's no financial benefit to it. But that's fair and fine because it's innovation. It's about possibilities. It's about ideation. It's about incubation effectively. So that separation is critically important.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, I fully agree. I wanted to ask you now about regulatory sandboxes. First of all, do you think they are a good idea when it comes to promoting innovation in artificial intelligence? And then, I recently published an article in the European Journal of Risk Regulation on a sandbox approach. It was called to regulating high-risk artificial intelligence applications. And in that article, we advocated for creating a sandbox in the European Union to test black box artificial intelligence. So the second question to you would be, do you think that a sandbox approach to black box artificial intelligence would be a good solution? Because I know it's a tricky topic. So
this is a very interesting topic because as you discuss with the various regulators out there, you have very polar views on their viability and their relevance. So my personal perspective is yes to regulatory sandbox. However, it's a conditional yes. Why do I say it's a conditional yes? Because what does a regulatory sandbox mean in the end of the day? To me, a regulatory sandbox is a systematic framework to allow for experimentation that otherwise would be forbidden. It doesn't mean that you are alleviating suddenly regulation. It doesn't mean that suddenly saying, okay, all this stuff doesn't apply to you anymore. What it does mean, and this is also one of the criticalities that you find, and I've had the pleasure of being with the regulator, being on the policy side, is the realization that actually now with technology, there's a lot more form over matter, whereby it's less about the specificity of how to do it, but more in terms of the underlying objective of what you meant to achieve, leaving to you the technicality of how to achieve it. But that may not be the case with some more existing policies and regulation, whereby it's very prescriptive of how to comply. So a regulatory sandbox allow by saying, well, let's just say, obvious case of what we spoke about financial inclusion, so alternative credit risk scoring, where I'm proposing an algorithm, an AI-based algorithm that is not using any financial information. I mean, if you say that to a regulator or traditional credit risk office, they'll be like, no. But saying, well, I am able to mitigate risk. I'm able to quantify risk. I'm able to estimate my potential NPLs. I'm able to A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It is just the underlying methodology in which I am doing is different to the current convention of credit risk scoring, for example. Again, hypothetically speaking, on whatever frameworks are in place. So it's a different how. So the regulatory sandbox then would potentially say, okay, David, you've shown on paper, on backtesting, that you have the confidence of managing this. We can allow you to run it in a safe, I never usually like the word safe space, but you know what I mean. And I say in a safe space. So it doesn't suddenly, it can't suddenly go and say, oh, you can now give it to the retail markets and millions upon millions. No, you're allowed to provide it up to this quantum of loan. You're allowed to give it up to this number of people so that we can monitor it. So if you think about it, a regulatory sandbox is ironically not for the people in the sandbox. A regulatory sandbox is for the regulator, is to provide the ability for them to now oversee in a closer, almost like in a microscope, okay, how does this now align to my environment and policies of regulation? And does it mean I don't need to change anything because actually it's all good? Or is it the case whereby certain regulations, the spirit remains, the form remains, but the matter, we need to allow for that flexibility of saying, well, you're given a certain degree of leeway as long as you're able to demonstrate A, B, C, and D, for example.
Mm-hmm. And still about sandboxes, I wanted to ask you, what are to you the most common challenges faced by organizations in moving data science and artificial intelligence from a sandbox or pilot environment into an enterprise productionalized environment?
There are several challenges. Okay, since your question was what's the biggest one, I would say, in fact, that the biggest one is the risk appetite. When it's in a sandbox environment, when in an innovation hub, when it's a pilot, it's like, it's okay, it's this experiment that's running over there. But when you suddenly go to an operational production, full-scale environment, it's like, oh, okay, now we're in the big boys and big girls league, effectively. A lot of times you find that the appetite is just simply not there, saying, I was okay while it was like that, but I'm not okay now with something. And sometimes it's also from a business landscape. It's a bit of a cannibalization, potentially. That would be the biggest. Underlying that, naturally, there is more of a platform question. How do you make sure that inability of running ML ops, machine learning ops, where, because at the end of the day, these algorithms are not rules. They're not like we came up with a hypothesis and that's it, we're running on it. And maybe 6 months or 12 months later, we will review our performances and if it's loans, let's say, or whatnot, balances. No, it's a living, breathing, decision-making algorithm. There needs to be a circularity with respect of outputs, performances, going back in as inputs for the retraining of the algorithm. That means that the platforms and the environments need to have this circularity enabled effectively. But I generally believe that is a secondary challenge because the technology is available. We've deployed it. We've been doing it. So other organizations can definitely do that same approach. But to me, it's about the risk appetite of, okay, what do we take and how do we take? Now, and finally, if I may, just very, very briefly, not to add to the component of challenges, it's also very important, actually going back to the discussion about regulatory sandboxes and about alignment of policies, is in the end of the day, there are differences. There are very specific differences. You kind of alluded to something about the black box, and that's a whole topic about it. So I'll call it a gray box. There are certain things that we've previously been familiar to be very explicitly overt, and now maybe not. But there are other things that are now explicitly overt that in fact previously are not. Now we may be able to in advance know the error, the number of times it's going to go wrong. Previously, the ability of actually quantifying that I am going to make this mistake this number of times is not as precise. So it's it's a bit different. So it is also important from an operationalization point of view. It's not just like, okay, here's a phone, go and use it. How do we make sure from a process perspective, it is also fine-tuned to allow for that operationalization of AI and machine learning-based products and solutions?
Thank you for sharing. This whole topic of data science, artificial intelligence is very interesting, and I would have liked indeed to keep talking about it for longer, but as I said before, I wanted to talk about two different topics today. So now I would like to ask you about just a couple of questions about UnionBank's moves in the crypto and digital banking area, because, as you are well aware of, because you work in UnionBank, it was announced in January that your bank would start offering crypto trading and custodial services. So actually, UnionBank has been quite active in the crypto scene for a while, and it's one of the licensed cryptocurrency exchanges approved by the Central Bank of the Philippines, as long as I know. The bank even launched its own stablecoin back in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, PHX, to provide rural banks in its network with easier access to payments and remittances. So why is UnionBank so active in this crypto scene, in the crypto area?
So, because if you think about it, what crypto allows, sorry, pause a second. I'm in a meeting.
Yeah, sorry, I basically asked you why is UnionBank so active in this scene?
Yeah. So because in the end of the day, going back to what we were discussing earlier about its tool, it's a mean, it's a capability. I want to give you an example, a very real life example of how crypto has been a phenomenal enabler for the UnionBank in the Philippines and others as in the broader ecosystem. In Philippines, you have quite a number of rural banks, small entities, exchanges, whatnot, which are not on the RTGS, on the real-time payment gateway. Now, obviously, you can put them on, but there's been challenges or issues in achieving that. So what was the alternative? What was the solution? We devised a real-time decentralized payments platform running on a crypto environment, essentially. A stable, but in order to mitigate the volatility that may comes with crypto, excuse me, it's a stable coin that's pegged to the Philippines peso. This allowed for a tremendous growth in scalability and onboarding these institutions that previously may have not had the ability of doing intermittences on a large scale effectively. So that's a real live example of how it facilitated it as a enabler in the back end effectively. So it's not like, oh, we're running on crypto. It's like, no, it is the enabler of how to make the change. So that's one. Number two is also the realization that, people are becoming a lot more active overtly with crypto, both in terms of cryptocurrencies, the wallets. Philippines is very big, the whole play and earn, where the earnings are in a form of a crypto coin. And then, of course, finally with NFTs. So essentially, it's a creation of an underlying economy, which has a slightly different representation to a certain degree. From a financial services point of view, is ultimately, how do we enable? How do we enable all of this? How do we connect? How do we bring the world of fiduciary responsibility? How do we bring the world of custodianship, et cetera, and so forth, to this formation of an alternative to a certain degree, which ironically at times is being created to address aspects of financial inclusion, by the way, or connectivity. No, it's finding alternative means that are faster in solving the problem. So how do we connect these worlds? That's the driver. That's the call to action. That's the goal. And what we've been finding in both these kind of bifurcated approach, one, using it as a backend enabler, as this, it's called I2I platform. We also done it in support in terms of bonds issuance, as well as overtly to connecting that. That's where we want to be. That's what we want to kind of assure that we're constantly aligned, not even if not ahead, but at least aligned with the advancement of people and the necessities and services they need in their day-to-day life.
Well, actually, this brings me back to financial inclusion. We discussed financial inclusion before and artificial intelligence. So I wanted to ask you now, do you think that cryptos can be an effective tool to promote financial inclusion in the Philippines and beyond?
Okay, so that's an interesting question because it goes down to in doing what? And I'll explain what I mean by that. I do think it could be an effective tool in facilitating financial inclusion because it's about interaction, connectivity, and speed. And at the end of the day, we are moving more and more and more to a real-time digital environment. And what you're finding is that, and in assuring auditability, traceability, and what I personally love about the world of crypto, world of blockchain, DLTs, and so forth, is I call it trust inbuilt. It provides you that sense of overt sense of auditability and traceability that is needed. In fact, the irony is again, this is from a personal view. If you say to me, David, you prefer a traditional currency notes versus, let's say, a stable coin of that currency note, I would say let's go with a stable coin because that one, from a supervisory point of view, is far easier to monitor, manage, and control than the traditional sense. So actually, I would say even regulators would prefer this one. But again, that's a personal view, just to caveat that. Back to the point about financial inclusion, yes, because it provides a very simplistic means of democratizing, essentially, and providing new levels of relevancy of economy. It may be, as like I mentioned earlier, the play to earn is what you're finding is that you're getting these almost mini economies that are exchanging, bartering. It's almost we're going back to prehistoric times where we're trading shells. So again, obviously it's not shells now, it's a far more sophisticated manner, but it's relevant. It's relevant to what's being done there and then right now. So the question is how do you create this link between what we know and love as a traditional financial system and these alternatives that are facilitating in the economy that is needed by, let's say, a potential group or demographics in supporting the exchange that's needed for that inclusivity. It shouldn't be an or. I think that's the message. It shouldn't be an or. It should be an and, where we're bringing together the best of both worlds. Some will advocate the full decentralization, lack of supervision of the world of crypto. Personally, I don't subscribe to that. I do believe on the importance and necessity of central supervision. It goes back to the whole question about financial crimes, about stability, which from an economy point of view, one has to take care. However, the world of crypto provides a digitalization, a sophistication that quite frankly we need. I mean, let's not even start talking about, let's say, financial supply chain financing and whatnot, where you want to make sure that there's a significant ease. Once, if I give as a last remark, perhaps, when you want to send money overseas, your money will disappear for a few days and then pop up in another location. So let alone someone in a village. To do that, they'd have to go to another location, to go to a bank. Hopefully that bank is connected. It is a very complicated. Now, with that technological enablement, they can be doing it with a click of a button, and everything is interconnected, traced, and theoretically instantaneous, or as near as possible of being instantaneous, knowing that the money that I've earned goes to the person that I wanted to go. So the possibilities are phenomenal.
Well, that's a very good summary, and I was actually surprised when I saw a few months ago how many people in the Philippines actually participate in those play-to-earn platforms. I knew that it was a big thing in Southeast Asia, but I was shocked to see those figures. So this shows you that, of course, there is a market in there for this industry.
Yes. Yes,
and this
absolutely.
actually brings me to my next question, which is going to be pretty much the last one before wrapping this discussion up, which is, could you please share a bit more about the Philippines' approach to cryptocurrencies and in general to the blockchain industry? Because we all know that while in Asia we can find many different approaches. I mean, we have countries like Singapore, which are very crypto friendly, whereas some others like China are the opposite. So each country has a different stance toward this phenomenon. So I wanted to ask you, where's the Philippines currently standing today?
Well, I probably can't speak on behalf of the entirety of the Philippines, but at least from an observation point of view, I would say far more aligned to the crypto-friendly. And I believe, it actually goes back to the discussion that we had earlier, that it's really a means of enablement. Like, for example, when UnionBank issued the stablecoin, the PHX, which was meant to facilitate the I2I platform to interchange, it was done obviously in full consultation with the regulator. And it's the realization that, look, this provides and enables something that perhaps in a traditional form wouldn't be achieved at the same pace or at the same speed. So I believe that I would maybe cautionably say it's the friendly, but naturally, and I believe including with all regimes, it is assuring that at the end of the day, stability, financial stability, regulatory environment is maintained, because the last thing you want is having a segment of population being manipulated or put in an unfortunate position, or of course facilitating crime, which a lot of times is unfortunately synonymous with crypto, which again I personally disagree, because if as a supervisor, if you say to me, David, can you supervise and monitor crypto, with the exception of very specific coins which are truly stealth in nature, I am able to track every single step of the way, which if you now have a euro in your pocket, I can't. I simply can't do that. I can't tell how that euro has been living from its inception. So it's a matter of thinking differently. But to answer your question specifically, I believe it is far more on the friendly side. And the outcomes that we're seeing, I mean, the Treasury, the Philippines Treasury issuing bonds, which is running essentially on a crypto environment to allow for access for Filipinos across the world, is evidence of that.
No, I concur. I mean, cash is by far the most anonymous means of payment that we can find, even more than cryptos. But still, I mean, no matter how crypto-friendly a country is, there are many things to bear in mind as well. I mean, financial stability, of course, needs to be protected, and there are many other interests that need to be taken in place, which could bring us as well to the idea of central bank digital currencies and many other ideas that we cannot discuss today. But I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure, David, to host you today. We are unfortunately running out of time, so we'll need to wrap up this discussion for today. But as I said before, it's been an absolute pleasure. I think both I and my listeners will learn a lot from you, from listening and re-listening to this episode. So for that, I would like to thank you.
Thank you very much for having me aboard. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's my pleasure. And well, to all my listeners, thank you very much for listening to this episode, and well, to all my episodes actually. And please stay tuned for the next ones. Thank you and see you soon.